everybody. I want to introduce you to somebody that I met last fall and I was super impressed by, and I just wanted to share her wisdom and her expertise with all of you. So I want to welcome to the show Kimone Napier, and she is the founder of Hire Breakthrough. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it was so fun. We had, I think, lunch together in New York City, and we were bonding and getting to know each other. And I was like, I love everything you have to say, what you stand for. And I'm just excited to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
You're a hiring expert. You have a lot of knowledge and background. You've held really high-level positions at big companies when it comes to HR. And today you're all about helping companies make sure that they find that right fit person. And I've talked to previous guests about why hiring unicorns, people who can do everything and anything, can actually hurt your business in the long run. And what's your take on that? I think a lot of people are looking, especially in the beginning stages of entrepreneurship, they're looking for the one person that can do everything.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
I definitely find that. And it's, I've experienced it myself, right? You start especially a small business, you start off, you might not necessarily have all the funding up front, but you really need the help, and you only know so much of what you know. And you're like, I need help in all these different areas. So you say to yourself, I need to find somebody that can help me with marketing, lead gen, sales, tech, automation, all these things. And so what you start to look for is a unicorn. But on the backside, a unicorn is really just it's like a phrase and something that we uphold amongst the people that we're going to employ in our business, contractors and things that they cannot live to forever. And I think that's the problem with using the word and trying to find a unicorn. You will find people who are multifaceted. So they have a lot of interest. They're good at a lot of things, but eventually that person will either burn out, or eventually they'll discover what it is that they like to do specifically in their business or in your business specifically. So let's say you might hire somebody and initially they're just like, oh, I can do all of these things for you. But eventually what will end up happening is that person might discover that, oh, I really like customer service, or I really like marketing. And it becomes too much, because as your business is growing, the things that you need in your business are growing too. And what ends up happening is sometimes people are leaning on one specific type of person in their business. And that's not smart in business either, because people leave. We went through a pandemic, so you never know what might happen. And it really isn't good business practice to just have basically all your eggs in one basket. So I always say it's good to hire people who are strategists or specialists in different areas to actually help you, because for sure this is the thing that they like to do, they're good at doing, and they can really help you grow and scale sustainably for the long term.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Great advice. So let's say that you're growing a business. Not that I know anybody like that. And let's say that she is trying to figure out how to staff the business. I'll be honest, with everybody listening, this is one of the hardest things I have found about growing an online business specifically, because when I had a brick and mortar, I just find it a lot easier to find local talent, or you'd meet somebody, or honestly, sometimes when I was just trying to find a great person for the front desk, I would have a great waitress and I would give her my card and I'd be like, let me know if you ever want to stop working evenings, because my brick and mortar was during the day. So I was like, you're awesome. Come with me. But I find it so hard in the online space, just you're not meeting these people in person. There's a lot of fractional people out there that talk a big game, but don't necessarily want to do the doing when they get into your company. I've found that. How do we piece together a team as we're growing online?
That's a good question. But I think when you are growing online, usually in a small business, if you're starting off, you're going to hire a contractor because, right, that's what you could afford at the moment. So you might look for that unicorn, as I was mentioning, at that specific time. But that's not a long-term deal. At least that's what you should know. So I'm telling you that. Don't think that's a long-term thing. You want to grow sustainably. So you might hire a contractor. And when you're doing that, you want to hire somebody that can implement for you. So this is not necessarily somebody that's going to be strategic. And I think that's where people get confused too, or you have unrealistic expectation. At that level, you're not hiring somebody to necessarily think for you or to almost like duplicate yourself. You're hiring somebody that is like a task doer or somebody that can implement things for you. So you can give them the strategy, like this is what all the stuff that needs to be done. It needs to be done by X, Y, and Z deadline. And you want somebody that's able to do those things or execute on that stuff. So you'll have a couple of those people at first as you're continuing to grow. And then when you really start to monetize your business and you're looking to really grow and, you know, use the word scale, that's when you're looking for more strategists to come in. So you might consider hiring somebody who's like an ops manager, or you might consider hiring a sales specialist. This depends on the type of business that you have, but someone who can help you to duplicate yourself. So for example, let's say if it was me, in my type of business, I might consider hiring somebody to help me with business development at that stage. Why? Because it's time consuming. It's only me, one person, and I might want to consider to hire somebody to help me to do all of those things. It looks different from everybody, but I would say what I would caution everybody and urge everyone to do is really sit there and work on your org chart and something that can support you for at least 5 years, 5 to 10 years ideally. But you want to start to map out what it looks like, so you know as you continue to grow and hit certain monetary milestones in your business that you can staff accordingly. Because I think that's a big mistake some people make, is that they don't hire enough, or some people on the flip side, they hire way too many people up front and you know, worry about meeting payroll and things like that. So you definitely want to find common ground in between the two areas.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And I think that's hard because you have some people saying hire for the future, right? And I have done that before my business and it's worked out. And I've done that before my business and it hasn't worked out.
Yeah.
Or you have people marketing themselves as strategists, but then they don't want to touch implementation. And you're like, oh, wait a second. No, I don't want you telling me what to do. Like, I don't want you delegating things to me in Asana. You work for me, you know, so you end up kind of like sorting through all of that and not realizing, if you're new to the online space or the language, like you don't necessarily know what it is that you're hiring, I think sometimes, until they're in it.
Yeah.
You got to sort through all that.
It's a good point to make, but I would say, so typically in small business specifically, most people hire an executive assistant first.
Yeah.
I was probably maybe one of the few that didn't do it that way. Why? Because I'm very good at execution, but social media was like my first thing, because I was like, this is too much. There's too many platforms, and I'm like, I can't keep up with algorithms. So I decided, let me get somebody to help me with this. So I would say if that's you and you're in that situation, you're like, okay, who should I hire next, or who should I hire first? You should think about what's taking the most of your time that you really need help with and that you can get a return on pretty quickly. Because that's the thing, you want to definitely see a return on investment. And I think when you hire people at first that you can't see that return yet, it makes it harder because you're still trying to monetize and grow your business.
Yeah, you really summarized what I think is a common concern. And for our consulting students, I always say, who are solopreneurs, I always say, like, I agree, hire that executive assistant first, because it's the easiest thing to delegate. And there's a lot of them out there that are good, that are looking to work for good people, good bosses. And that's definitely, I think, such a strong piece of advice on your first hire.
Yeah.
So I know that you also specialize in diversity in the workforce. And how do you hire diverse talent without trying to like fill quotas?
Another great question. So I have people come to me all the time and they'll say, like, I want like diversity on my team. And so that leads to a conversation, like, what does that necessarily mean? Because it means different things to different people. But I would say in a nutshell, if you're trying to hire more diverse candidates, so that could mean candidates from all different types of backgrounds, maybe all different types of experience, it really has to start too with your company culture and your values in your business. Because if it's not a business that supports diversity, people who are looking for like diverse places to work, they won't even think of your company. So it starts off with your company branding. I know that's probably surprising to most, but that's where it really starts. Like, people want to know what you're about, especially in this day and age when it comes to recruitment and just talent. The same way that you're trying to vet, you know, candidates and talent, they're trying to vet you just the same.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to be able to see like, okay, what are you about? What is it that you value? Where do you see yourself or your business going in the next couple of years? They want to know all that information. And it also goes next to the language that you're using on your website, the language that you're using in your job description too. So a lot of people don't realize sometimes just the language you use in your job description could really turn off a diverse candidate, because sometimes job descriptions are written with a very specific person in mind. Might just turn off people who would possibly be great for the role, but just the language that you're using is not necessarily reflective of that. So like one thing, one example of that is that you could easily put that you want to find candidates that are BIPOC, right? So Black, Indigenous, people of color. You could talk about like how your workforce supports that. That is something that might get people's attention. However, if your job description is very kind of, and I would say outdated, and it's just like, yeah, we want you to have 15 years of experience in this. And then of course that the salary isn't reflective of the years of experience, you're not going to get diverse candidates to apply to that type of job. So it's a lot of things that has to do with branding and language. And then it also depends on where you're looking for talent. You have to actually get pretty diverse in where you're looking for people. So immediately people think, oh, I'll post on Indeed, or maybe I'll post something on LinkedIn. And that's all great, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find diversity. You have to find diverse groups of people. Like, where are they hanging out that I could actually promote this job and get somebody maybe better than what I thought I might get for the role by promoting it there. So I would say also your network is definitely important. You want to definitely promote it within your networks, but ask people to share it too. So like, for example, I had a client who, themselves did not necessarily, their branding wasn't necessarily the most diverse, but the people that they knew supported so much diversity. And I said, a great strategy would be to ask a lot of these people in these different networking groups to share that with their network. That's also a very great strategy. And it doesn't cost anything to do that. So especially for your first couple of hires, maybe if you're struggling when it comes to budget and you're like, I don't have a large budget to like advertise for this role, that's a great strategy to utilize in order to get it in front of more diverse talent. And I always say, if it's an entry-level role, you could definitely promote it to some HBCUs, which are like historically Black colleges and universities. Because they always have talent and it's diverse. That's what those colleges and stuff, and the people who are going to those colleges typically are. So you would want to promote it there as well. So those are just a couple of tips that would be helpful for you to get it in front of a more diverse audience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It was interesting because I have a diversity and inclusion statement at the bottom of my job descriptions, and we post to LinkedIn. Like, I never really thought of going outside of LinkedIn because that's where a lot of people hang out with the skill sets that we're looking for. So it's a great suggestion, but I was surprised. Like, I would find, I wouldn't necessarily know what somebody looked like, and I would be on Zoom doing our final interviews, and most of the candidates were diverse. And I didn't know that, obviously, going into it. I was pleasantly surprised, but I was also curious. Like, I was wondering if that statement isn't very common. And maybe that's why people who had a minority background felt comfortable applying. I wasn't sure, I was happy about it. It was what I wanted to take place. But are there other than the diversity and inclusion statement that you can put on a job description or ad? Is there anything else language-wise that could be in a description like that it would either turn off or attract minorities?
Yeah, I think one thing that would definitely, I would say turn on. Minorities are really great talent, qualified talent. They want to know like your story, especially for small business. So like in this generation, this is what Generation Z, is that what they call it? Generation Z now. They really want to know like what it is that you're about. So a great way to do that is, especially in a small business, is to talk about how you even built the business to begin with too, because at the same time, people want to feel inspired about where they work. So I always say like baby boomers and Generation X, like there were very clear lines distinguished between like your personal life and work. Whereas millennials and Gen Z, the lines are very blurred. So people want to actually feel inspired when they come to work. They want to feel purpose. So I would say a good tip to use is to write your purpose, write your mission in your job description, kind of explain, where your company is at, what you're looking for, and be honest. I think that's one of the big things, is because I see a lot of job descriptions that just look like somebody just threw like spaghetti on it or something, or like paint, and it's just a whole bunch of words that mean absolutely nothing. So you want to write it in a way, it's kind of like copywriting, like you're telling a story throughout the job description, and you want to be definitely inclusive in terms of responsibilities and honest about what it is that they're actually doing. Because I see a lot of job descriptions that it paints a very bright picture, but when the person is actually in the role, it's something completely different.
Yeah.
And it's like a waste of time for you and the candidate. So I would say just be honest and upfront. And I would say, to your question about the diversity and inclusion statement, that definitely is going to make you stand out, because most people that would consider themselves a small business are not using diversity and inclusion statements. And the companies that are doing it, by law, they have to do those things.
Right. Oh, interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So if you're doing it as a small business, like in the brain of the candidate, be like, wow, like they're thinking about diversity and inclusion at this level. And don't think because, you call yourself a small business that people don't want to work with you. I get that question a lot. People actually are very tired of the corporate churn and burn, and are looking for something very different and refreshing. And I think we have a really big competitive edge, honestly, since the pandemic and this transition to remote work. So I'd say that was the time to take advantage of that with talent.
Yeah. Would you say that most diverse candidates have had microaggression and they're just trying to figure out how to like not let that happen? They're like looking at these job descriptions and they're looking for flags.
Looking for red flags, they've been told that they have imposter syndrome and things like that. So they've been really gaslighted in the corporate space. I mean, if you think about the big five, right? People like, I remember like coming out of college and everybody's like, oh yeah, go work at Amazon and Google and LinkedIn and these big companies who are doing tons of layoffs right now. The work culture is not necessarily that inclusive. People are burnt out and they're just looking for something refreshing and new. And then they get, to work with some of these smaller companies and see the way that they're working. They're just like, wow, this is so different. This is what I've been looking for. And that's the thing. They don't know you exist. That's the thing. They don't know your companies exist. So when they see a job description in front of them that is like a breath of fresh air, it will prompt them to apply to your job.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, this is great. I think from my perspective as a white leader, like I'm always learning. Like I'm always like, tell me more. How can we create more of a diverse workforce? How can we be more inclusive? Like I'm always happy to admit that I don't know what I don't know. So this is really helpful. And I'm sure that our listeners are the same, because I think to be human, you care naturally about diversity and inclusion, but you don't always know like the little details that come up when you're trying to implement it in your organization. Yeah. Before we move on, is there anything else that you want to share? If there's other listeners like me that are like, tell me how to be better at this, or is there any other tips that come to mind?
I would say one tip, and it's kind of like sidebar, but a question I always get asked a lot from people who are starting out or they may have hired before and it just did not go well. They always ask me about budgeting. Like, how in the world do I even start? Like, where do I get the money to do this if they're still, growing and stuff? Because, like a small business, for the most part, you're not getting much funding. So you're bootstrapping the business. So one thing that I always encourage people to do is to start to set aside money from the very beginning. And that was me. I remember when I started my business, as soon as I think I got my very first client, I had like, I think 5 accounts, and I set it up. That one was like for taxes, one was like for operational expenses, but I had an account specifically that was my recruitment budget for my own business, because you don't have any funding. So you have to actually like have the money in order to do it. And the mistake a lot of people make is that they wait so long and they have so many different expensive, and now they're in a situation where they need to hire, but they feel stressed. Or
Yeah.
they're in a situation that they have the money, so they'll like have maybe like a month of this person's pay, and there's like stressing out the person that they're hired because they need to see a return and make some money, and the relationship doesn't go very well. So I always encourage people to have 3 months. Ideally, if you could have 6, that would be even better. But 3 to 6 months of like the salary, or whatever you're going to be paying this person, whether employee or contractor, as like a good net, so you can actually feel relaxed in that process, because it's going to feel a little bit jarring. You're going to say to yourself like, oh my gosh, like it was just me, and now I'm bringing some people to help me, and I'm responsible for like this person's livelihood to an extent. So if you have that set aside, it makes honestly the process a little bit easier, and you can start to see a return because this person can get trained. That's the thing too. Some people just like, okay, I hired you and just go and support me. Just go do everything. And we know that's not realistic, but if you think about it this way and position your business like this, it makes it that much more worthwhile, where you can actually get some great results out of that. So that would be like a tip that I would share with everyone.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's a lot of wisdom in there. So just as our final question, what is your favorite wild card question to ask a candidate in an interview? And what does it tell them about? What does it tell you about them?
This is going to sound so generic, but I think my very favorite question is, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
And I love to ask that question because it always surprised me by what they say. Like I always say, somebody, when they apply, you have the application, you have their resume. And so for us in recruitment, it kind of is painting a story as to this person and like what it is that they're interested in. And then when I get to the point where I can ask them this question, I'm surprised by all of the things that sometimes they tell me. So I remember like recently I had interviewed somebody, and this is for like, I think it was for like a operations manager position. And one of the things she talked about was like in 5 to 10 years, she talked about, I wanted to be a COO of the company that I'm supporting, so I could support a CEO, and they don't necessarily have to worry about the day-to-day operations. Like I want to be able to run this on my own. And I was like, wow, like first the confidence in that statement.
Yes.
I was like, that's not something, I mean, for me, I don't hear that often. Some people talk about like, oh yeah, I want to have kids and all that. Like people will say those things, which is fine. But she was clear as day. She was like, this is exactly what I want. Kind of the reason why I applied for the job, because I see myself like stepping up. And, employers are looking for that. They want longevity with the people that they hire. And I was like, this is such a wonderful question. And then some people talk about like things like, oh, I want to open up my like a musical studio and things. I hear it all with that question. And so I always like to hear that, because you're so surprised by what people say. And you'll see a lot of similarities too, like oddly enough, between that person and like the person that they're going to be supporting in the role. So it's just a really nice question to ask, just to like level set and get to know them as humans. Because at this point, if they could do the job or not, but you want to get to know them on a more personal level to see what their actual goals are and how you can support them.
Yeah. I always like, it gets to that motivation, which I think is the one thing you can't train. You can train skill sets, but are they hungry? Do they want, at least that's how I look at it in a business, like the size of the businesses I've had over the last 20 years. I need people who are hungry. Because I'm hungry, and I want to grow my business, and I want them to be part of it and want to be part of it. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here. It's great to chat with you as always. And if people are interested in learning more about you, they want to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I would say you can find me in 2 places. Of course, you could go to my website, www.hirebreakthrough.com, or you could just find me on social media. I'm pretty active on Instagram. So my handle is Simply Kimone, and you can feel free to connect with me there.
Okay, awesome. Simply Kimone. So good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you, Laura, for having me.